Hi everyone, welcome to our next lesson. We're going to be continuing with events in this lessons. All right, so the first thing that we did is we created a new file called 08 events, and we got it right there. We opened it up. So let's just see if it's working. Console.log working. Okay, and it's all, as you can see, it is giving us the console that it is working right there. All right, so we've been dealing with events during this course already, where we added the event listener and we had the button on click, right? This little one that we have right here. So we're just going to expand on our knowledge on events, all right? Now, events are actions or occurrences that happen in the system that we are programming, basically in the code, which the system tells you about so that we can respond accordingly in a way that we might desire to something to happen. So basically, if I want this button to click and change the background, we can do that. All right, so let's do that. So const button, let's equal that to document dot query selector, right? And then we want to call that button. All right, so let's select the button. Let's just minimize this window just to give us some space. Right, like this. And let's console log that button to see if we have it. Right, we got it. As you can see, it even highlights it for us in the DOM right there. Very nice. Okay, so we have it. So let's delete it. All right. Now, in the case of websites or a web in general, like event is fired inside the browser window, inside the little window right there, and tend to be attached to specific items. So our item right there is basically the click that resides in it by a single element. So sometimes when the DOM is reloaded, the event is fired off as well. Okay. Just a note. Sometimes event handlers are called event listeners. They're kind of interchangeable, but they're pretty much almost not the same thing. Technically speaking, they just work together. The listener listens for the event that is happening, and the handler handles the code that is handling and run it in response to the event. But anyway, let's quickly get into this. So let's create a function called change bg. All right, change background. Okay, so we're going to run a function called change background. So we create a function, opening and closing. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to create a variable called body tag document. Let's just go say it to body. And so we can do document. Nope. That one document dot query selector, and we're going to select the body. So basically the whole body. And then inside here, we basically want to do a body dot style dot background color, and we want to set that equal to hashtag 333. No, 333. Okay, so basically it's like a dark blackish gray. Right, and then we want to add an event listener to that button. Okay, we want to listen for the click event, and when we're done with that, we want to change the background. All right, so we can even have done this part right here. We could have done document, instead of creating a variable, we could have done document.body, okay, dot style. We could have done it like that, but I prefer to do it like this. Right, a variable on its own. All right, so let's see if we click the button, let's see what happens. Okay, it's supposed to turn gray. Let's see if it's working. Doop. Right, as you can see, it turns the background gray. So the moment an event is fired off, so basically this is listening for the click event. As soon as the click event is fired off, it tends to run this function and that function. So voila, and there it happens for us. All right, so that's basically more an event listener or event handler in JavaScript. Okay, ways that we can use events. There are a number of ways. Let me just comment this one out. We might use it again. There are a number of ways to add event listeners to our code and web pages, so it runs when the associated event fires. Now, the event handler properties that we have, the properties that exist that contain event handler's code. So basically, we got our property right here. Is some of them is basically like this button dot on click. This is our event property right there. Okay, so sometimes we can set the event property equal to be a named function. So basically, we have the button on click. Now, instead of to add event listener, we could have actually just say change. So we could have just done this. Right, so I'll uncomment this part, and we got the function there. Sometimes we can assign that property equal to the named function. So let's see if it still works. If we click it, you can see it still works. All right. Now there are many different ways we can do the properties available for us. So some of the event properties that we have is we got button dot on double click. All right, equal that to change background. All right, so let me just see if it's working. So let's refresh. If I click once, nothing happens. If I click twice, then you can see it happens. So if I click once, nothing happens. Okay. So if I double click, you can see the background change. All right, let me copy this one down. That's on double click. All right. The other one we have is on mouse over. On mouse over. That's it. On mouse over. So basically, if I hover my mouse over there, it changes. Okay. So nothing happens here. As soon as I go over the button, it changes. That's some of the properties that we have. Okay. The other one that we have is called mouse out. And so let me refresh it. So if I go onto the button, nothing happens. As soon as I leave, it changes the background. Okay. So that's the one that we have. Let me just add a comment here. Properties, event, and all right. So on mouse over, on focus, this. And just do this. btn dot on focus equal that to change background. Let's see if it works. So if we focus, it works. All right, cool stuff. Now I just want to show you guys one more thing. So let's open our HTML. But I rather want to show you, but please, we need to keep our JavaScript and our HTML separate, okay, not mixed up together. Now, it's a good practice to do that, because you can actually do this, like on click inside your HTML, and we can actually do that. This event right here, change background, change BG. Okay, we can actually do this inside that. So if we click that button, you can see it works, because right here there's no event for going off. It comes directly from our index.html, that event firing off right there. So if I delete this, if I click on it, nothing happens. If I add it, click on it, you can see it works. But please don't do this. I'm just showing you guys, but don't do this. Separate your HTML from your JavaScript. You can even do your JavaScript inline at the top between the script tags, but don't add it inside this. Rather do it in a separate file or in your head section between your script tags, but never inside that. It's just not good practice. Okay, enough of that. All right, adding and removing event handlers in your code. Okay, now I've shown you, let me just copy this down, otherwise we have to keep on scrolling up. Let me do this. Right, I've shown you how that we can do it in a modern syntax. So that you remember, guys, the button on click, the events that we had right here, those ones, these ones right here, that is the oldest syntax, the old way of doing it. The modern way is actually to add an event listener to it, because there's certain advantages for doing this. All right. So the modern mechanism for adding event listeners is the event listener method. This method right here. So this is the one that you're going to want to be using all the time, instead of this right here, the built-in properties. Okay. Now, example that we have just created right here. Right now, inside our event listener, we have two parameters. Right. What event do we want to register the function with, and the method that we want to run in event to this event firing off. All right. So we can even do it in a number of ways. So like we had our button firing off, we can do everything inline actually, and then we can run an anonymous function. So basically we could have done like this. Button dot add event listener. And we can listen for the click event. And instead of that, we can actually run an anonymous function like this. We could do it like this. All right. And we run an anonymous function. We could have just said do something like this. Let me just comment this part out. So we could have done like put an event lesson with a click event, and we can actually add the anonymous function. Or what we have done in here, we actually created a separate function that we had, and a named function, and we can actually run the function right there. So let's see if it still works. As you can see, it created the background for us right there. So that's two ways of doing it. Okay. Actually one, how did I say it? But no, let me rather not say it. Yeah. All right. So there is also a counterpart function. You see, this is the advantage that we have, that is called the remove event listener, which removes a previously added event. Okay, so what we can do now is, so after we run the event, we can actually do the remove event listener. Okay, which one it is? We want to remove the click one from the change background. We can do that as well. I just commented this anonymous one. So now the thing is, if I click on the button again, you can see the event listener is not firing off because we removed it right there. Okay, so this you would normally do in a circumstance. Let's say, for example, you've got a simple or small program or things like that. You won't need to clean up your code. So you don't need to remove any event listeners. It's not necessary to do that. But when you come to larger projects or more complex programs, to improve efficiency, you need to remove the event listeners. Otherwise, they will actually slow down your program and things like that. Okay. Right, let's move to other event concepts. So let me just comment this out. Great stuff. Right, the other one that we have is called the event object. Okay. Now, let me use an example. Let's say function. Okay. And I'm just going to call it like the change background one. And we're going to fire off the event. console log that E. Okay, let me just get my button again. Uncomment the button and give us some space to work. All right, so we got the button right there. So, but let's see what happens when we click the button right there. What we log basically to the browser right here. Okay, so basically we're going to do a button dot add event listener because we want to practice. We want to listen for the click event, and then we want to run the change BG. Okay, so let's see what happens if we click that. Now you can see what happens is it gives us, that is called the event parameter. It's a parameter event inside parameter, but it's actually called the event object. Now sometimes in an event handler function, we'll see a parameter specified with a name such as event, like this, like the E, event, or sometimes it's spelled like EVT, like this. All right, but in our case, you're going to see it mostly the event like this or the E. But you will see this quite a lot because we are lazy as programmers, so we just type it like this, E. All right. Now, this right here is called the event object, and it is automatically passed to the event handlers to provide extra features or information. So in our case, what kind of information do we have? All right, it gives us information. All right, the target is the button, and the button on the x-axis and on the y-axis, and the length of the button, the layer, and this is basically relative to the top of the document or the side of the document. All right, so you get some useful information right there. Now let's see if we add the dot target property right here. Let's have a little bit of fun. So if we click on it, you can see the target that it had is called this button right there. Right, now this e.target, you're going to see that a lot because it's a very useful tool for us in JavaScript. Now let's create a couple more buttons or elements inside our index.html. Right, let's add a paragraph with 2, and just random stuff in H1 with all right, and then we're going to add an event list to the body. Okay, so all I've done is I've just created the body. Okay, then I've just kept the function the same, but I added an event listener to the body. So let's see what happens in our console. So as you can see, it showed us the H1. If I click here, it shows the H1. If I click there, it gives us the paragraph. And if I click here, it shows us the button. Okay, so if I click anywhere else, it shows us the body right there. Right, so very, very handy. So basically, if you want to create an event, but we're going to get that now. I'm just jumping ahead of myself. But remember, that is basically the event object. Now, the event object can give us some useful information or methods or features attached to it. Okay. Now, what if, all right, let's just comment this one out for us for now. Right. Save it. Yes. Remove it from here. That's it. Okay. Now, what if sometimes we come into a situation, let's say you have a form that we want to fill in with a username. And sometimes we don't want the form to be submitted because either the user didn't enter a name or something like that. I know there's built-in methods, but not all the browsers support that feature. Now, how do we do that? Now let's quickly create a form. Let's just comment this button out because we might use it later. Let's create a form. But we're not going to have an action. All right. Inside the form, we're just going to have a label for first name. Let me pause it, speed up the video for you guys so you don't see me typing out everything. Right, so what I've done, let me just put, right, so basically what I've done is I just created input field for first name. There's the label right there, and then the input field for the first name, and a button to submit the form between two form tags. Now why did I move that? And actually a paragraph with just the inline styling of one row. Okay, so we've done that right now. Okay, so in this file, so what we're going to do is we're going to create variables for each one of those. So the form equal to document dot query selector, and we want to select the form. Right, so CLG form. Sure, yep, it's correct. You don't have to do that, console log, but I want you to get kind of used to doing a lot of console logs to your browser. Right, so document.querySelector. Right, so first name.querySelector. We want to select the input field. All right, so we got that. And then we also want to select the paragraph. Yeah, equals to document dot query selector, and we want to select the P element. Okay, so we got this one right here, and we got the button, and then we got the form. Okay, nope, we still don't have the button, so const btn equals to document dot query selector, and we want to select the button. Oh, good J. But let me spell out the button. Yeah, let me do it like this. Okay, so now the problem is when we click on the form dot submit. Okay, so we want to form, when we click on the form and we press this on submit, on submit, we want to run this anonymous function that's checking the event, the event property. Now, if the first name is equal to nothing, okay, because we want to, if it's equal to nothing, we want to prevent a default from happening. E dot prevent default. So basically what we're doing here is we're saying is if the first name is equal to nothing, prevent the default from happening, meaning prevent the form from submitting. So basically let me add the paragraph.text content. Please enter your first name. Okay, so let's see if it works. The thing is, what I've got to add there, it must be dot value. All right, so the value of the first name needs to equal nothing. So if I press this, hopefully it works now. All right, please enter your first name. All right, so if you refresh and then do this, please enter your first name. But if I do add something right there, submitted, it doesn't give us that error because the first name is not equal to an empty string, right? So the e.prevent default is basically preventing the browser from the form from actually submitting what it normally would do. Okay, so yep, let's go on to our next topic, which is quite a mouthful. It's called event bubbling and capture event. Okay, event bubbling and capture. All right, so let's make an example. We can delete this. All right, let's create a couple of divs. For div, and this is div. All right, so that's one div. But inside this div, we have another div. Inside this div, we have another one. And then inside that div, we actually have our button right there. Okay. All right. Now, when an event is fired, so basically if we click the event right here on the element, now in modern browsers, we'll run two different phases. Okay. The first one is the capturing phase, and the other one is called the bubbling phase. So basically, if I click on this button right here, doop, I clicked it. So two phases can be fired off: the capturing phase and the bubbling phase. Now, in the capturing phase, the browser checks to see if the element outermost HTML has an event handler registered on it for the capturing phase, and run it if it has one. So basically, if I fire this one off, it check on our HTML, does it also have an event listener of a on click on it? So basically, if we had inside here, we have a button with an on click event on it. Okay, that equals to some anonymous function and some, just write an example, some function, some code. Okay, so basically, as an example, we're doing the on-click event. Okay, so basically what will happen now, it's basically the browser on the capturing phase, it will check this, then it will go to our body section, because the body is the next in line. Okay, then it moves on to the next element and do the same. It checks if there's an event on it, registered on it, and then run it if it has one. Okay, then it goes to the next one, then it goes to the next one. It does the same thing until it gets to the button. Now, in the bubbling phase, actually the opposite happens. The browser checks to see if the element selected has any event handler registered on it. So for us, we check for the click event, and then it basically in the bubbling phase then runs it. Okay, then it moves on to the parent element, then immediate, and then it checks and it does the same thing. Then it checks if it has an element, and if it has an event listener on it, then it basically run it. Then after that, it moves on to this one and this one. As you can see, it basically bubbles out. The capturing phase is basically moving inwards. The bubbling phase basically moving outwards. Okay, the modern browsers, by default, all event handlers are registered for the bubbling phase. So any model, so if you're using Firefox, it uses the bubbling phase. Basically, it checks this one. If it's got any event listeners on it and register on it, and basically runs that code. If it doesn't have it, not if it doesn't, basically it just moves on to the next element, the next element, and the next element, and the next element, until it reaches the HTML. Now, in cases where both types of event handlers are present, the capturing phase will run first, followed by the bubbling phase. But just remember, in modern browsers, your bubbling event is the one that is by default enabled. Okay. So basically, if you click on this button, if we click on the button, the browser will run that code, that event listener, and then it will move on to the next one, check if it has one, then it runs that code. If it has one, then it moves on to this one. It runs the event listener if it has one, and it just keeps on doing that until it reaches the HTML document. Now in the capturing phase, it comes here, it runs the code. If it has one, and then it moves to the body. If it has an event listener, it runs it. If it has on this one, if it has an event listener, it runs it, etc., etc. I think you guys get the point. All right. Now, the thing is, even if it doesn't have one, it still checks it, and it moves on to the next one. If it doesn't have it, it still checks it, it moves on to the next one. That is what event capturing and event bubbling does. Okay. Now, the problem is this can be a very annoying behavior. Now, in order to stop this from happening, what we do in JavaScript is we can actually do this like on that event. We can actually just say, as soon as this is done, just run the stop propagation. No, don't do this. Basically, what we do is, like you remember from the e.prevent default, we also have another property called e.stopPropagation if you want this default behavior not to happen. All right. Now, the thing is, there is some good attached to it. All right. In the case of event bubbling, it's called event delegation. All right. So let me just comment this out. It's called event delegation. Now, when event bubbling happens, now let's say we got it right here. Instead of, okay, let's create something quickly. Right, I created a UL with some list items in it. Now, the thing is, what we can do with event bubbling, we can put the event listener actually on the UL element instead of putting event listeners on each of his children. So basically what we'll now have, so if we click on the button right here, the event will actually just fire off on the parent instead of having to add basically it will bubble over to the parent. So basically their default behavior, we can take advantage of it instead of adding event listeners on each one of these individually. All right. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate you. So if you guys want to have more, if you have any questions, I can probably just ask them in the comment section if you have any questions about these, and I can maybe link for you a nice resource where you can go read up more about it. And thank you guys for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video, thumbs down if you don't like the video, and negative or positive feedback in the comment section. Thank you guys, and see you in the next one. Goodbye.